The O'Reilly Factor is on tonight.
Ma'am, can you put somebody around you on the phone?
The Factor finally succeeds in getting the 911 call of that horrendous mob attack in Norfolk, Virginia.
I was stopped at a light. Somebody threw something in my car. I stepped out and said something, and then about 10 guys came over and jumped me.
And wait till you hear what happened to the teenagers who savagely beat two newspaper reporters for absolutely no reason at all.
There was a lot of guys, people, black kids, kicking on a guy.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. A travesty of justice. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. As you may know, the Factor has been investigating a terrible crime in Norfolk, Virginia. On April 14, 2012, two reporters working at the Virginian Pilot newspaper were driving in a tough part of town after leaving a movie. While stopped at a light, somebody threw a rock at their car, according to the police report. The man in the car, David Forster, got out to confront the rock thrower. He was then attacked by a group of African-American teenagers. Police say a crowd of approximately 30 surrounded the car, and about 5 thugs were involved in the assault on Mr. Forster. The woman in the car, Marjan Rostami, was also attacked, but managed to call 911, as did some other folks.
Okay, what's going on at church in Brambleton? Okay, they're beating him up. Ma'am, is somebody with you? Ma'am, can you put somebody around you on the phone?
I was stopped at a light. Somebody threw something in my car. I stepped out and said something, and then about 10 guys came over and jumped me. There was a bunch of kids beating on this one man. It might have been 10 or 15 kids. I don't know. But it's a white male. I'm telling you, it's a white male. I hope y'all hurry up. And this guy's okay. I don't know what happened to the guy, but there was a lot of guys, people, black kids, kicking on a guy.
Now, authorities kept that 911 call locked up, but finally gave it to the Factor yesterday after we filed a Freedom of Information Act request, the second one we filed. The first one was denied. A few weeks after the attack, police arrested and charged 4 teens, ages 13 to 16. But eventually, charges were dropped against 3 of the 4. Only a 17-year-old was convicted. His sentence, probation. He was also ordered to pay $352 in restitution to cover the medical bills of the 2 reporters. While investigating this story, it became apparent the city of Norfolk did not want to aggressively pursue the case. And even more troubling, the editor of the Virginian Pilot, where the 2 victims work, played it down.
This story has been blown out of proportion, and that's not to diminish the fact that I had 2 reporters who got beaten. But what it amounts to is a street altercation, not a mob attack. No evidence that it was a racial attack.
Bull. Talking Points believes this was not a simple street altercation, and there is no question it was a mob attack. Whether it was based on race is debatable. But for a group of assailants to beat up and terrorize 2 innocent Americans with dozens of witnesses watching and virtually nothing happens to them, well, this is a true travesty of justice. The city of Norfolk depends on tourism. It's obvious they don't want this story in the public arena. But my job here is to tell you the truth and expose wrongdoing. This whole case is shameful. And by the way, the Norfolk media attacked the Factor for its coverage of the crime. That is shameful as well. And that's the memo. Now, for the top story tonight, let's bring in attorney and Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly. There's a number of legal things to talk about. First of all, how are the victims in this case doing?
We understand that the male victim is doing fine, and we don't know the update on the woman, but we have every reason to believe she's recovered.
I think they're both back at the newspaper working there.
Right.
Our producer, Dan Bank, actually talked to them. One was off the record. The other says he's all right. Neither of them, we should point out in the interest of fairness, want the story covered. They want it to go away.
Although we should say that they filed a complaint against the police department for the way in which they handled this investigation when it first got started. And that is a case we asked with the police department. That is a case that is still being handled and pending.
Right. So the 2 victims officially said the police department in Norfolk wasn't doing the
That
investigation
they were not
properly.
investigating,
But
and that could
here's the
be
problem.
what led to the ultimate result in the case, Bill.
Of course, they didn't want to solve this case, but here's the problem. The newspaper editor, you just heard him. He didn't want this story.
How does he say it's not a mob? And if you listen to the 911 tapes,
Because
and
he
I've
didn't
listened
want to
them
cover
all,
the story.
I've listened to them all, and I was on with you when you first filed your request for these 911 tapes, to which, forget Bill O'Reilly, the public is entitled to those tapes. That we hear 911 tapes all the time, and what they said to the factor first was, oh, you can't have them because you're out of state. Well, then we pointed out to them, that's not an exception to your obligation to disclose this information to us. And then they said, oh, actually, it's not because of that. It's because we have an ongoing investigation. Well, we had to live with that until the investigation was officially closed, which it is now. And now we hear the tapes, and not only do you hear the terrified victim on it, but you hear people describing it as a mob,
Because
mob
that's what it
action.
was.
So why is the Virginia pilot, the boss, who happens to be not only a journalist, but the boss of these two journalists, telling you...
You want me to answer that
this
question?
This is not a mob action.
Because the editor of the Virginia Pilot isn't interested in the news. He's interested in protecting the image of the city, because that's where the money is made in tourism. That's what it's all about. Last question on this for tonight. This punishment is ridiculous. Would you agree with that?
There is no punishment
Right,
for
no
3 to
punishment.
4.
They just
First of all,
did
there's
it.
supposed to be 5 of them who actually assaulted the guy,
Right.
so they didn't find one. 3 get off with nothing. 1 gets a slap on the wrist.
Okay, so it's ridiculous. How often does this happen around the country where people are physically assaulted, nothing happens to the assailant?
I have no way of knowing that as a fact, but I can tell you this. Where there's good police investigation, in a case like this, where you have this many eyewitnesses, it should be readily ascertainable who was involved. I mean, people were giving descriptions, even on the 911 tapes, of the outfits being worn by the perpetrators. And if you had a quick-acting reaction, I see no reason why they couldn't have found the proper identifications, including the 2 victims who could have participated in IDs.
Right. So this is just, I said, shameful across the board. You would agree with that?
I do, and I think
right.
the
It's awful.
criticism of you for covering it, it's a crime on 2 innocent people.
It's a huge stain on Norfolk, Virginia. There's no doubt about it. All right, Senator Dianne Feinstein, California, introduces the assault weapons ban, which they did have for 10 years here. My question, we'll let this thing go through the Senate. We'll see the votes in the House and Senate. But the last time the ban was passed, was there any meaningful challenge to it?
There wasn't, because that was 94, and the NRA at the time is said to have believed they did not have a particularly friendly makeup on the Supreme Court at that time.
So the NRA didn't challenge
No,
it
so they didn't want gun rights getting adjudicated under that court. The
But
court
this
looks
time there
very
is
different
likely
now.
to be. Right.
Not only, there's 2 things that have changed. The court looks very different now. It's more right-leaning than it was then. And number 2, this ban that she has proposed is much more broad than the one that was put in place back in 1994. Now, we're still getting our look at it. I mean, our first look at it, she just put it out today. But it looks like, among other things, she wants to ban handguns that have detachable magazines. So
Yeah,
that
the clips,
And,
right.
and one characteristic of a military weapon. The ban in 94, you had to have 2 or more characteristics.
All right, so it's a
this is what
different
they
bill.
just passed in New York State, and there have already been suggestions that the New York State prohibition is going to be found unconstitutional because it comes too close to taking handguns out of millions of Americans.
You fully expect this to go to the Supreme Court, the Feinstein
I think the
situation,
NRA
if it
is going to
passes,
look at this much differently this time around, but I don't think it's going to pass because they don't have the votes right now in the Senate.
We have a minute left. On Tuesday is a legal segment, told everybody about a Pennsylvania professor, college professor, who murdered his wife with a crowbar and was going to be let out of jail after 5 years on parole. Now, Pennsylvania has reversed it, rescinded that. What happened?
The parole board reversed its decision in the wake of a couple things. The family made a stink and met with the parole board. It went into the national media. And most critically, the judge, the trial judge who tried the case, wrote an unbelievable letter to the parole board saying, don't do this. When I sentenced him, I only gave him 5 to 10 because the guidelines required me to do that. I wanted to give him much more. The guidelines actually wanted me to give him 3 to 4. I wasn't going to do that. I gave him 5 to 10, thinking he'd be held for at least 85.
Yeah, right,
he said, don't release this guy. He's a dangerous man. And they reversed themselves.
I think it was he is illegal, ladies. Nobody wants to mess with them.
I certainly don't.
That's right. All right.